Oh, hi. I'm just doing a little reading up on baking. You know, biscuits, scones, pancakes, quick breads. It's really quite fascinating. Well, hey, I'm gonna go wash my hands and I'll meet you in the kitchen. We'll do a little baking together. Okay, so we've washed our hands and we're ready to get baking. We're going to start off with a basic cream biscuit recipe. This involves mixing dry ingredients, adding cream, then we're going to pat it out and cut biscuits. This doesn't involve cutting flour and butter together, which is a more complex method, which we'll move on to next. I've preheated my oven to 375 degrees, and let's get started. We're going to start off following our recipe with 2 cups of all-purpose flour. This is unsifted. Even when I'm not sifting flour, I like to fluff it a little bit so that it's not compacted. And we take that, we just level it off. So we've got 2 cups of flour. To that, we're going to look at our recipe and we're going to add 2 level teaspoons of sugar. I've got sugar in a bowl here. Level that off. And we're going to do 2 teaspoons of sugar. To that, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder. And baking powder cans usually have this handy little thing that levels it off for you. So we're just going to 1 level teaspoon of baking powder. And I think we've got salt, which is 1/2 teaspoon. And I've got some salt in a bowl here. This is kosher salt. Level that off. Add that. And I'm going to grab a wire whip here. And we're going to whisk our dry ingredients together. This is basically just to incorporate them all together, so that when we add our cream, we're not collecting just the baking powder or just the salt. So we've got our dry ingredients whisked together. We're going to add 1/2 cup of heavy cream, 1.5 cups, I'm sorry. And as you can see by our liquid measure, we've got exactly 1.5 cups there. We're going to add that to our dry ingredients, and we're going to mix this together with a wooden spoon. In this particular case, we don't want to overmix. We just want to pull all our dry ingredients together to form a nice soft dough. And as you can see, they're coming together nicely. So we've got the consistency we want. You see it's sticky, it's kind of wet right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to set our spoon aside. And we're going to grab a little bit of flour here and just dust our board with flour. This is going to give us a non-stick surface to knead our dough on. Most biscuit and pie crust, scone dough is things you don't want to over-knead, you don't want to over-mix. This particular recipe actually benefits from being a little bit kneaded a little bit longer. So we've got a nice floured board. It's keeping our hands, it's keeping the dough from sticking to the board. We're going to knead this for about 30 seconds. And by kneading, I'm rolling, pushing the palms of my hands forward. Then I'm going to turn it, pushing the palms of my hand forward again through the dough. And if it starts to stick a little bit, you just keep turning it, adding a little more flour to your board. And as you can see, from the sticky dough we had before, we've now got a nice smooth-looking dough, nice and soft. And this dough is actually very silky. And when we get to about this consistency, maybe add a little more flour, just because now we're going to pat this out and cut it. So after kneading for about 30 seconds, see we've got a nice consistent dough, very uniform. We're going to pat this out. I could use a rolling pin and roll this out, but I don't necessarily want to beat it down any more than I have to. I'm going to get this down to about 3/4 of an inch And then taking a traditional biscuit cutter, you dip that in a little flour to keep it from sticking. And we're just going to cut out some nice biscuits here. Transfer them to an ungreased baking sheet. You could also use a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And we'll cut our biscuits here. Okay, so we've got our biscuits cut. They're on an ungreased cookie sheet. Our oven is preheated to 375 degrees. We're going to pop these in for about 15 minutes or until they're nice and golden brown and fluffy. Alrighty, so our biscuits are nice and golden brown. Set those aside, they're nice and hot. And if we break one open, you'll see we've got a nice flaky crumb. What I'm doing now is cutting fat into flour, in this case butter, in order to form a dough for scones. You know, there's a faster, easier way to do this with your home food processor. I have mise en place here, which means to have everything in place, which is really important in baking because you're dealing with chemical reactions and exact measurements. So in this case, I've pre-measured everything out, and we're just going to assemble our ingredients. So I'm going to remove the top from my food processor. I'm going to add 2 cups of flour. This is all-purpose flour. 3 tablespoons of sugar. 1 tablespoon of baking powder. 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And we're going to put our cover back on and engage the lock. And we're going to just pulse this a couple of times just to get our ingredients mixed together. And we're going to remove that, and we're going to add 5 tablespoons of chilled butter. You want your butter nice and firm so that it breaks up and makes kind of a sandy texture. And we're going to pulse this 12 times for approximately 1 second each time. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And now we're going to open this up and just take a look at our consistency. And as you can see here, we've still got a few small clumps of butter, but it's kind of like the same texture as sand. Okay, now to that we're going to add 1/2 cup of Zante currants. Currants are basically raisins, raisins that are made from champagne grapes or Zante grapes. Now we're going to put our cover back on. We're going to pulse this just a couple of more times just to get those ingredients mixed up. And as you can see, flour makes a mess. Baking at home is always a little messy. So I'm going to grab a mixing bowl here and dump our dry ingredients into there. And we're just going to set this aside. So as you can see, I've got my currants, my almonds, my butter and flour. And again, this is kind of a sandy or gravelly consistency. And to that, I am going to add 1 cup of pre-measured heavy cream. Make sure we get all of our cream in there. And then we're just going to stir this up. We don't want to overmix. We just want to kind of gather all these dry ingredients together. And this is going to form kind of a loose dough. As you can see, it's very similar in texture at this point to our biscuit dough that we did earlier. And once we get it to about this consistency, still very sticky, but you can see there's lots of crumbs in there. Let's scrape this off. And we're going to flour our board like we did before. We're going to knead this. We're not going to knead this probably quite as much as we did our biscuit dough. Again, scones, this is a soft dough method. And we just want to gather this all together. And we're going to knead this probably 10 or 12 times on our board. Like I said, we don't want to over knead because our scones will be tough. We want a nice flaky consistency. So we're just going to pushing our palms forward and turning our dough. We're going to knead this 10 to 12 times. And for those of you scoring at home, that's 12. So I could probably press this out the same way we did our biscuit dough, but in this case I'm going to use a rolling pin There's a traditional wooden rolling pin. I prefer marble. This is non-porous and less likely to stick. Hit that with a little bit of flour. And I've got the weight of the marble, so I don't have to put nearly as much pressure on it. And again, we're going to roll this out to about 3/4 of an inch. Make a nice rectangle here. Set our rolling pin aside. Now, traditionally, scones are cut in triangles. I prefer mine a little smaller. So we're using a bench cutter here. In this case, it's a crinkle cut bench cutter. And we're just going to cut these into 3 strips. Separate those strips. And then we're just going to cut small triangles. Grab an ungreased cookie sheet here, and we're going to set our scones out. And again, cutting into small triangles. Nice uniform size will ensure uniform baking. And space them out evenly on your cutting board. Okay, so now these are our baking sheet, uniform size, placed pretty much evenly apart. I'm going to brush the tops of these with a little bit of just heavy cream. You could also use an egg wash, which would be just kind of beaten up egg whites. And you could also top them with just some sugar. Or if you go to your local baking store, you can buy sanding sugar, which is a coarser sugar that'll put a nice kind of flaky appearance on them. And I'm only going to brush about half of these so that when we pull them out of the oven, you can see the difference. This is just going to put a nice glossy shine on them. Got my oven preheated to 425 degrees. We're going to pop these in, and they'll take probably 12 to 15 minutes as well. Okay, so it's been about 15 minutes. Our scones are nicely browned here. So as you can tell, if you look at them, the ones on this half of the pan are the ones we brushed with a little cream. They're a little shinier. The ones on the other half have a little duller finish. No real difference in flavor, just kind of an appearance thing. Okay, we've done a couple of doughs. Now we're going to move on to batters. And the first one we're going to do is a pourable batter, which is a pancake batter. This recipe's been in my family for over 100 years, and I know it like the back of my hand. So we've got 7 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 cup of sugar, a teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of baking soda, and 1/2 cup of baking powder. The difference between baking soda and baking powder is baking soda is a leavening agent that reacts with acid, which in this case is going to be our buttermilk, and baking powder reacts with heat. Baking powder is more commonly used in cakes, which we'll see later. So I'm going to mix up my dry ingredients, just like we did before, just to make sure that they're fully incorporated. And we're going to set those aside for just a moment. And then in a larger bowl, we're going to add 8 cups, or 2 quarts, or 1/2 gallon of buttermilk. And like I said, this is going to provide the acid that's going to react and cause the leavening of our baking soda. And to that, we're going to crack 6 whole eggs. We'll crack them into a separate bowl first to make sure we don't have any shells. Always crack eggs on a flat surface. If you crack against the side of a bowl, your tendency will be to have shards of the eggshell, which will break off. So as we crack these, put 6 into a bowl, and we're just going to mix them up very lightly, add them to our buttermilk. And in this instance, we're going to be adding our dry ingredients to our wet ingredients. So we're just going to whip these up a little bit. And we're going to add the eggs to our buttermilk. And again, we're just going to quick mix that up a little bit. And then we're going to add our dry to our wet. Now the key to a successful pancake batter is you don't want to overmix. You want a nice, stiff but pourable batter. It's going to appear a little bit lumpy. Whip that up just a little bit. If you overbeat pancake batter, your pancakes are going to be thin and kind of lifeless and tend to be flat. I like my pancakes thick and cakey. Okay, so as you can see, it's a well-mixed batter, but it's still got a few lumps in it. Tap the batter off of that. Into that, we're going to add 1/2 cup of melted butter. Just incorporating a little bit of fat to our batter. And we're just going to stir that in gently just until it's mixed in so that we don't, again, overbeat our batter. And when you can see that the butter is thoroughly mixed in, that is a perfect pancake batter. I like to let my batter rest for about 30 minutes before I start baking it on the griddle. That allows that acid to interact with the baking soda, and we'll get our first rise out of that. Okay, so the recipe that you just saw is for a half a batch of what I actually made. This is Grandma's batch. This is what I grew up with. I've cut the other one down for you for a more family-sized batch for yourselves. Now, I've got a nice hot griddle here. This is 350 to 375 degrees. I prefer to use a healthy amount of oil because I like my pancakes crisp on the outside. So we're just going to spread this around a little bit. And we're just going to ladle these on. And we'll get a nice sizzle going under each one of them. And again, this is a pretty stiff batter, but it is still considered a pourable batter. And we'll start off there, see how we come out. Okay, now after about 2.5, maybe 3 minutes, you can see that they're starting to get bubbly around the edges, starting to dry a little bit. That's anything that we're just about ready to flip. If you flip them too early, you're going to end up with a battery, doughy center. So you want them to get nice and cooked on one side, and they should be nice golden brown. Always try to flip away from yourself so you don't splatter grease. Flip carefully and gently. Okay, so after about another 2 minutes, you can see they're equally brown on the other side. It should be done all the way through. You've got bubbles showing through. We're going to remove these to a plate, and we're going to ladle a few more on. I'll show you a couple of variations we can do. Pancakes are really versatile. You can add pretty much any kind of fruit. You can add chopped bacon. You can add nuts. What I'm going to do here is a couple of my favorites. Start the same way. We're just going to ladle our batter on. And we're going to start with some fresh blueberries. And you can just drop those on. You kind of want to space them out evenly. The juice from the berries is going to add a little moisture, so they're going to take a little bit longer to bake. We'll do a couple of blueberries. You can also use individually quick frozen blueberries. I find fresh usually work the best. And I've also got some pecan halves here. Add some pecans, which go really nice with a good maple syrup. And in making your pancake batter, you can also add other flavorings to it. You can always add a little vanilla. You could add some cinnamon. You could add a little lemon juice, a little lemon zest, if you want to do a lemon blueberry pancake. And of course, my favorite, chocolate chips. And you want to kind of keep them spaced out evenly enough so that you get a little chip in every bite. So after a couple of minutes on the other side, we've got our plain pancakes, our blueberries, our chocolate chip, and our pecan. You add a little fresh maple syrup and you're all good to go. Okay, so we've made our perfect pancake, which is a pourable batter. Now we're going to move on to a couple other pourable batters. We're going to do a quick bread, which is a banana bread, and then we'll move on to some muffins and cornbread. We're going to start off with our dry ingredients. We've got 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. And again, I'm just going to mix those up just to make sure they're evenly incorporated. And then we're going to mix our wet ingredients. In this case, I've got 1/2 cup of butter, or 1 stick, And I'm going to cream that together with some brown sugar. And we're just going to start that off. Okay, so as you can see, I've got my butter and brown sugar creamed together now. My brown sugar is completely incorporated and dissolved in the butter. So to that, I'm going to add 2 whole eggs and 2 1/3 cups of ripe mashed bananas. You can actually go to your grocery store and ask them for overripe bananas that they've usually taken off the shelves, and they'll go back and get them for you. 2 1/3 cups is approximately 5 bananas, 5 medium sized. So I'm going to mix together my creamed butter and sugar along with my 2 eggs and my mashed bananas. Mix that up until it's all nice and uniform here. And then I'm going to set my whip aside, and I'm going to pour my wet ingredients into the previously mixed dry ingredients. And again, just like our other batter, our pancake batter, we don't want to overmix this. We just want to stir it together until all the ingredients come together and they're nice and moist. And again, it's going to be a stiff batter, but it's going to be a pourable batter. Our leavening agent in this case is our baking soda, as well as our 2 whole eggs. And as you can see, it's all mixed there and nice and moist, but not overbeaten. A few lumps in there from the bananas. And we're going to pour this into a prepared pan. Loaf pans come in a variety of sizes. You could also do this in muffin pans, but I'm going to do these in loaves. This is a traditional size. You can also buy these smaller individual foil ones if you want to do these as gifts. It's kind of a nice size, and they're disposable. So we're just going to spray that a little with a pan preparation spray. You can also use a little butter and just wipe that around the sides, and that would accomplish the same thing. Basically, you're just trying to keep your batter from sticking. And we're going to pour this in. You don't want to overfill your loaf pans. About 1/2 to 2/3 is usually good. I usually like to stick closer to the half side because these are going to rise. And I've actually got enough batter here for one more small pan. So again, a little pan prep. And with this batter, you could also stir in some pecans, you could stir in some chocolate chips, some maraschino cherries, any other kinds of fruits or nuts you'd like to add. So we're going to pop these in a 325-degree oven for about an hour. The larger pan's going to take a little longer. I'm guessing these smaller ones are going to run about 45 minutes. Okay, our banana bread's in the oven. While that's baking, we're going to throw together a quick muffin. I love this recipe because it's quick and simple. You throw everything together, mix it all up, scoop and bake. So we're going to start off, again, with our dry ingredients. We've got 5 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 cups of sugar, 5 teaspoons of baking soda, 1 tablespoon of baking powder, 1 tablespoon of cinnamon, and I'm just going to quick mix up my dry ingredients a little bit. And to that, we're going to add 1 quart or 4 cups of buttermilk. Again, buttermilk being the acid that's going to interact and cause the raising of our baking soda. And we're going to add 1 cup of melted butter, 4 whole eggs, and let's mix this up. Again, you don't want to overmix, you just want to make sure that all your ingredients are nice and well mixed and incorporated, nice and moist. And as you can see, we've got a few lumps in there, but for the most part, a pretty nice smooth batter. Now to that, we're going to stir in 1 box, or I think this is a 15-ounce box, or about 4 cups of granola, and 1 cup of craisins, or dried cranberries, and 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. Now we're going to mix that up with a rubber spatula. You could also use a wooden spoon for this step. And again, just stirring it around, incorporating our ingredients. Nice thing about this recipe is you can refrigerate this batter for up to a week. You can bake it right away, refrigerate it, scoop and bake it. You could also freeze it and then thaw it and scoop and bake. So again, we've got a uniform looking batter, a few lumps plus the lumps from the granola obviously. And we're going to scoop this into some muffin tins that are lined with paper liners. And you want to scoop these again 1/2 to 2/3 full. And you could top them with a little sugar, dribble on the edge there. Okay, so we've just about got these filled. I'm not going to use the entire batch here. I'm going to scoop 2 dozen muffins, and I've probably got enough batter left to do another 2 dozen, which I'm going to stick in my refrigerator and maybe use next week. Set that aside, and we're going to pop these in again into a 325-degree oven, which is preheated, and these are going to run probably 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, our granola muffins are now in the oven, and while those are baking, we're going to throw together a classic cornbread. We're going to start off with a 1/2 cup of melted butter, and we're going to mix this all right on the pan on the stove. So I've got a 1/2 cup of melted butter. To that, I'm going to add 2/3 of a cup of just regular white sugar. We're going to stir that together. This is similar to the creaming method we used in our muffin batter. And to that, I'm very quickly going to beat in 2 whole eggs. And I am doing this on a cooler stovetop. I melted the butter and shut it off, so I'm not actually cooking this over the stovetop. And once that all comes together, we're going to take our baking soda, which is 1/2 teaspoon, and we're going to throw that right into our buttermilk. And then we're going to dump our buttermilk into our skillet. And we're going to mix that up. Now we've got all our wet ingredients combined. To that, we're going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour and 1 cup of cornmeal and about 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. We're going to mix this all together, and this again is going to be a lumpy batter. It's not going to be smooth. And we're just combining these together till all the ingredients are just nice and moist. And there we go. As you can see, there's a few lumps in there. And we're going to prepare an 8x8 square baking pan. You could also do this in muffin pans. And we're going to scrape this right into there. If you wanted to, you could stir in a little cheddar cheese, some diced jalapenos. And we're going to pop this in a preheated 375-degree oven for about 30 to 40 minutes. Alrighty, so our banana bread and our granola muffins are out of the oven now, and I'm going to check those for doneness. You want to stick a toothpick right in the middle, make sure the toothpick comes out dry. I'm going to try that one more time. Toothpick right in the middle. Toothpick comes out dry, it's done all the way through. The muffins, you can either do the toothpick test, or you can just kind of lightly press them in the middle, and if they spring back, they're done. If they stay indented, they're not quite done. You have to put them back in for a few minutes. Oh, great, our cornbread's done. I'm going to let these cool, and when I come back, we'll plate everything up. Okay, so we made biscuits and scones, we made muffins and a quick bread, we made a quick and easy cornbread, and pancakes. You've seen all the basic ingredients and techniques that we use in baking, so once you master these baking fundamentals, your only limitation is your imagination.